This story happened many years ago when I was in high school. I live near Detroit, Michigan, and one day for my art class we had a field trip. We went to the Cranbrook Art Museum, which is a good destination for field trips around here. The art museum is really nice, and it's a cool area from what I remember. That was the only time that I went there, but when we arrived there was a school and a museum and some other buildings. Around them was some other stuff, and it seemed like a campus almost. There were these winding roads with woods beside them, and a few walking trails as well. So for my art class, we were going with a group of about 20 kids. We got to Cranbrook, and after getting off the bus, we went inside of the museum. It was an all-day field trip, so we were inside for a while. I remember that we got a break kind of towards the end, and we were allowed to go outside a little. I didn't have any really good friends in the class, so I went outside sort of by myself. I was just looking around at what was nearby, and I walked on a path a little ways. I was curious to see where it would go, so I crossed this street, and then the path sort of entered the woods. Nobody else was over there, and it seemed very quiet. I was planning to walk for maybe 5 minutes and then head back. Pretty much, I was just wandering around. However, as I walked through the woods, I heard this sound coming from off the path somewhere. It was a man's voice calling for help. It was weird because it was like he could hear me approaching, but he was off the path and in the woods. I couldn't see him from where I was, but when I came around the corner, I saw this guy emerging from the trees. When I saw him, he said that he needed help. The guy did not appear to work at the museum or be a teacher or anything, and he was much too old to be a student. He was just wearing a camouflage jacket and jeans. He told me to follow him, and he started to go into the woods. I didn't want to though, and I asked why. He stopped and seemed annoyed, and he told me to just follow him. He then added that he had hurt his foot. I was confused. What did him hurting his foot have to do with me going into the woods? He told me to follow him again, and I walked a little bit closer. Then, suddenly, the man turned around and started to sprint towards me. My only reaction was to run away. I turned and started sprinting down the path back towards the street to get out of the woods. It wasn't that long of a ways, thankfully, and I was able to make it out. When I did, I heard the man laughing behind me. He did not leave the wooded area of the path, though. After that, I went back inside the building with the rest of my class, and stayed with them for the rest of the field trip. I didn't see the guy again, and I've always wondered who he was. Was he trying to be funny, or could it have been a possible abduction or robbery attempt or something like that? It gives me the creeps to think back on it. When I was in college during my junior year, I lived in a house with another guy. His name was Sam, and we had met the year prior in a class project. I had a good amount of friends in college, but I wasn't able to find a good living situation, because for a while I didn't know if I was going to be transferring schools or staying. I ended up staying, which I was happy about, but I was kind of late to find a place for the following year. It was pretty much a situation where I would have to live in the dorms again. But then the guy I had a class with kind of randomly asked me if I knew where I was living, and I said no. So he told me that he needed a roommate for a house that he was living in. I pretty much said yes right away. I felt like I had gotten lucky at the situation, and I didn't know Sam very well other than the class that we had together. We had never hung out or anything, but I figured that it would be fine. So the house was pretty small and old, but other than that it was better than the dorms. It had an upstairs with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. Then downstairs was another bathroom, a kitchen, living room, and a dining room. After moving in, things started out fine. I didn't really do much with Sam, we mostly kept to ourselves, but I didn't have a problem with him at all, and he was cool. However, several months into living there, some strange things started happening. One night, I remember that I heard a door keep opening and closing downstairs. It was really weird. It was like it kept opening and then closing right away non-stop. It creeped me out, so I got out of bed and went to look. By the time I got downstairs though, nobody was there. It was so weird. I went back upstairs and Sam's door was closed, so I assumed he was asleep. I didn't know how to explain the noise, but I was able to go back to bed a while later. Now, like a week or so after that, I remember that I was woken up to the sound of somebody knocking on my bedroom door. I thought that it had to be Sam, obviously. After waking up, I asked what he wanted, but he didn't answer me. I got up and went over to the door and opened it, but nobody was there. It was really strange. Then, later on, one time when I was doing homework late at night, I heard footsteps downstairs. I assumed that it was Sam, but then he texted me asking if I was downstairs. When I said no, he said that he heard someone down there. I did as well, and it really creeped me out. So I remember that we both went downstairs and looked all around, but didn't find anyone. It was really strange, and we even considered calling the police, but decided not to. So some really weird things had been happening around the house. I talked with Sam for a while about it, and he claimed that he had heard some strange things too. Then, things got even worse. One night, I heard a loud banging on my bedroom door. It was like somebody was trying to break the door down. I didn't want to open it, but it wasn't locked or anything. After it stopped, things went quiet for a while. Then I finally went over and looked. When I opened the door, nobody was there. It was very strange how all these weird things were happening. I didn't even want to live in the house anymore. Then, one night shortly after that, I got added on Snapchat by a guy from our school. I knew him because he was friends with Sam, but I wasn't really friends with him. After adding him back, he texted me and asked me if strange things were happening in our house, and I said yes. The guy then told me that it was all Sam. He said that Sam had told him how he pretends to make the house all scary. He said he did that because he thought it was funny and he didn't like me, and he also hoped that I would get scared and move out. Apparently, this guy had had a falling out with Sam for some reason, and they were not friends anymore. So now this guy wanted me to know the truth. He also said that he had even helped Sam once. I think it was the time when we both heard somebody downstairs. Anyways, I was shocked to hear it, and I wasn't sure if I should feel better or worse about this. I decided to confront Sam about it the next day. At first, he denied it, and then he tried to play it off as a joke. We argued briefly, and then we went our separate ways. For the rest of the time that I lived there, I barely spoke to Sam at all, but also nothing else strange happened. This happened during my freshman year of college. I was taking a theater appreciation class, and we had to attend some of the plays the theater department put on. Normally, I went with friends, but for this one, I had gone alone since I had another event when my friends went. The play started at 6:30, so I set out on the short 10-minute walk to the theater. When I arrived, I saw a man standing by the entrance. Out of habit, I smiled at him as I tend to do that with strangers. He smiled back, but there was something about him that made me feel uneasy. He got in line right behind me, and when we waited, I overheard him muttering to himself about his car and where it was parked. I really wasn't paying attention until I heard him say, "Where are you sitting?" I thought he was talking to someone else, so I didn't respond. Once my ticket was scanned, I went around and found my seat. But then, to my surprise, the same man sat down next to me. I heard him mumble, "I can't believe it, right next to me." His tone sent a chill through me, but I tried to ignore it. He was probably in his early 30s, and soon enough, he turned to me and started asking questions. Too many questions. He asked, "Do you come to these plays often?" And I told him no. He quickly launched into how he was a regular and loved them, and mentioned that his girlfriend was in the play that night. I was still creeped out, but I felt a twinge of guilt for judging him so quickly. Maybe he was just being friendly. But then, something strange happened. Everything I said, he had the same interests, the same experiences. It was unsettling. When he asked what kind of music I liked, I decided to mention a lesser-known artist thinking he wouldn't know her. However, he said that was his favorite artist. It was too much. He was agreeing with everything I said, and the more he did, the more uncomfortable I felt. Right before the play started, a woman around his age sat on my other side. The moment she sat down, he went quiet. Then, oddly, the woman struck up the same kind of small talk with me. She even asked me similar questions, almost as if they had compared notes. As she talked, she touched my arm a few times in this weird, too familiar way, just like the man had done earlier. I felt trapped between them. Thankfully, the play started, and everyone went silent, but I could still feel their eyes on me, watching me the whole time. At intermission, the man offered to get me something from the concessions. I declined, but he kept insisting. I kept saying no, but he seemed frustrated and eventually got up to leave. As soon as he was gone, the woman picked up right where he left off, asking me about singing because she thought my voice sounded pretty. I told her I used to sing in high school, but I had stopped. Again, she touched my arm while she talked, more than once, and it made my skin crawl. When the man returned, he brought back some M&Ms and Milk Duds, both of which looked like they had already been opened. He offered me the Milk Duds, and I declined. He didn't eat them either, just placed them on the floor like he wasn't sure what to do next. Then he started asking me more personal questions about my family and whether I came to college alone. I lied, telling him that I lived with my brother in an apartment far away from where I really lived. That's when he leaned in and told me he was an amateur music producer and that I had a great voice. He said I should come by his place sometime to record. He just happened to live where I said I lived. It was all too much, and the tension in my chest wouldn't go away. Then his phone buzzed. He quickly looked at it and tried to hide the screen, but I saw the message. It said, "She's really cute. Do you think she'll work?" My heart was racing, and I wanted to bolt right then and there, but I didn't know what to do, and I needed to watch this play for my class. The woman beside me suddenly touched my arm again and whispered that she was going to the bathroom, suggesting I come with her. At first, I thought maybe she had noticed the man's odd behavior and was trying to help, but then I saw her phone light up too with a message that read, "Yes." It was from an unsaved number. I declined her offer and she never went to the bathroom. We all just sat there as the second half of the play dragged on, tension thick in the air. They both kept glancing at me, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The moment the play ended, I got up and climbed over the woman, making my way to the exit as fast as possible. Once outside, I darted into the bathroom trying to collect myself. When I finally came out, I saw the man and woman standing in the corner of the foyer, having what looked like a heated whispering argument. When the woman spotted me, she immediately stopped talking, and the man began walking towards me. "I can give you a ride to your apartment," he offered. I told him no, that my brother was picking me up. Just then, one of my classmates ran over, calling out to me saying hi. The man backed off when he saw my friend. We left together, and as we walked out, I didn't look back. I just ran home, staying on the phone with my mom the whole way back. Now, I can't stop wondering about what was up with those people. Why did they act like they didn't know each other when they clearly did? Why did they both ask me the same creepy questions, touching my arm like they were trying to establish some weird familiarity? And what was with the texts? Were they communicating with each other about me the whole time? Where did the candy come from, and why was it already open? Why didn't he eat any of it? And why did they keep acting like they were trying to separate me, asking if I wanted to go to the bathroom or ride with them? I don't think I'm being paranoid when I think something was seriously wrong with those people. To make things worse, a girl had also been abducted, trafficked, and murdered in my college town about a year or two before I was there. The whole situation made me uneasy. This happened back when I was in high school around 20 years ago. I still remember it pretty well though. So, I was in a science class during my sophomore year. It was a pretty typical science classroom that was fairly large with chairs and small desks at them. Then to the right was a large lab area with tables and more chairs. For most of the time we would be sitting at the desks, and then like once a week we would do labs. My assigned seat was at the most far back left seat in the class. There were only 2 other kids in my row of seats, and I was closest to the classroom door which led out to the hallway. I was a pretty good student, but science was not my best subject. Most of the time in class, I found myself very bored and my mind would wander. So on this day, the teacher was teaching and writing on the whiteboard and stuff. I was bored and I wasn't really paying that great of attention. I was supposed to be taking notes, but I remember that I started looking around the room out of boredom. At one point, I looked to the classroom door to my left and to the window. It was one of those doors that has a small vertical window that was skinny and not that big. But when I looked over, I saw a man on the other side looking inside of it. It was a grown adult man who I did not recognize to be a teacher at the school or anything like that. He was staring right into the room, and then his eyes locked onto mine when I looked at him. His eyes were somewhat wide, and it seemed like he must be joking around, but I had no clue who he was. I looked around to the other students, and they were all paying attention to the teacher and didn't notice the guy. And where the teacher was, as well as most of the other students were, you couldn't see the door because there were shelves that blocked the view. So I looked back to the man, and he was still there, but then he ducked down and went out of sight. I went back to taking notes and just kind of shrugged it off. But it still seemed like a really weird thing, and I wasn't really sure why the guy did that. But I was still under the impression overall that it was a harmless prank. Sometime later, maybe 10 minutes, the man returned. I'd been looking over to the window periodically. Number 1, I wanted to see if the guy would come back, and number 2, I was bored. When he returned, he just started to stare at me. I looked at him for an uncomfortable amount of time and then looked away. When I looked back again a short time later, he was still there. I thought about alerting someone but elected not to. At the time, as weird as the guy was and borderline creepy, I didn't want to talk in front of the whole class. It would be disrupting to the teacher's lesson, so I didn't say anything. A short time later, the man was gone again. I went back to trying to pay attention to the teacher. Now, literally 5 minutes later, a sound came over the school intercom. Our teacher then announced that the school was being locked down. She turned off the lights and instructed us to get on the floor and under our desks. Then she went over and locked the classroom door. I started thinking about the man and wondering if he was the cause for the lockdown. I was also afraid that he would come back to the classroom. I remember some of the other students whispering to each other, and I told some about the guy. Nobody seemed to know exactly what the lockdown was for, though. It lasted for about 45 minutes, which felt very long. Then finally, it was lifted. We were able to resume with our school day. At first, nobody would say what the lockdown was for, but by the end of the day, the word had spread and I found out. An adult man had actually been stalking a girl who was in my class. He followed her to the school and entered the building and hid inside. It was the same guy who I had seen looking into the classroom. The man was also on drugs, and he was arrested by the police when they found him hiding in the school. It was a big relief for everyone that he was caught. The girl in my class was not even aware of him following her. It's crazy to me that I saw him, and I thought it was just some guy joking around at first. I'm really glad that he didn't try to enter our classroom. A little over 5 years ago, I worked at a Chick-fil-A. I worked there for almost a year, and overall it was a decent job. Of all the fast food jobs I've worked, which is 3, Chick-fil-A was by far my favorite. However, there was one crazy event that took place that I will never forget. I was working until close one night at the Chick-fil-A. It had been a pretty busy night to that point, and was pretty typical. Finally, things started to quiet down significantly in the last hour. I was the only person left working behind the counter to take people's orders. There were a couple of people inside the dining room, maybe like 2 or 3. At about 10 minutes before closing or so, I remembered that a man walked in. I thought that he was going to go to the counter where I was and order something. Instead, though, the man turned and then walked into our dining area and kind of out of my sight. I didn't think too much of it, though. Eventually, within the next 5 minutes or so, the people who had been inside the dining room left. Now the dining room appeared empty at glance, but I knew that the man was still in there somewhere because I hadn't seen him leave. When it was time to close, one of my coworkers came over to lock the doors. I mentioned that somebody was still in there, and then I went to go find the man and tell him that we were closed and he would have to leave. After I started walking into the dining room, I had a bad feeling because I couldn't see the man anywhere. But I was telling myself that maybe he had left without me noticing. But no. As I walked farther in, I saw the man suddenly come out from behind some tables in the corner. I started to tell him that we were closed now, and at first I thought the man knew instantly what I was saying and was going to leave. Because after looking at me, he started to jog past me and seemingly go to the front of the restaurant. But he did not leave. Instead, he stopped near one of the tables towards the front and then got on top of it. I was so confused. I walked over to him and told him again that we were closed. The man didn't even acknowledge me. Instead, he just stood on top of the table and looked around. This was really weird, so I went back towards the front of the restaurant and my coworker already saw the guy. She was watching him with a confused look on her face. Then the man hopped down off the table and then jumped onto another one. He stood on that table and my coworker yelled at the man to get down. He looked at her and then leaped off the table and then knocked over a chair and then ran to another table. We both did not know what to do. The man was running around the dining room, jumping from table to table and almost doing parkour, it seemed. But this guy was no professional. In fact, a couple of times he slipped and fell and knocked over chairs. But he wasn't getting hurt at all, which I couldn't believe. He would just get right back up and keep going. We figured that we would have to call the police because the man had to be under the influence of some kind of drug. We tried to warn him, yelling that we were calling the cops if he didn't leave now, but he still ignored us. The guy ran around the place and then he stopped jumping on tables. He pivoted into then flipping the tables over. My coworker and I, as well as 2 other coworkers who had been in the back, all tried to stay away from him until the cops arrived. When they got there, they were able to stop the man's rampage and they arrested him. He was on some type of drugs. The dining room was completely messed up and we had to stay late to fix it, but overall we were glad that nobody was hurt or anything. That was the craziest thing that ever happened to me when I worked at Chick-fil-A. This happened not too long ago. I have a PC gaming setup in the corner of my bedroom and I live by myself in an apartment. I love gaming and I'm usually on there every night just about. So one time I was online and gaming with some other people like I often do. Most of the games I play are multiplayer and it's typically a mix of people I know and people I don't know. A majority of them I don't know though. So on this particular night of gaming, it was a Friday night and I had nothing the next day, so I was going pretty late. At about midnight I was still going strong and not tired or anything. So I was in my bedroom, but even though I had my headset on, I thought I heard a noise from the other room. It sounded like maybe somebody was knocking on my door. So I took off my headset and I heard some more knocking. Somebody was in fact at my apartment door, but who would it be? It was midnight. I got up and I walked out of my bedroom and over to the front door. As I was approaching, I sort of heard somebody walking away. When I looked through the peephole, nobody was there. I even opened up the door and looked into the hallway, but whoever had knocked was gone. I thought it was strange, but I didn't really think too much of it. With it being late on a Friday night, there could be people drinking or just messing around and having fun. I just went back to my room and got back to the game. So I continued gaming, and about an hour later roughly, at maybe 1 a.m., I was still going strong. Then I heard what sounded like more knocking at my apartment door. I had my headset on once again, but this time the knocking was noticeably louder. I got up once more and rushed over to the door this time to see who it was. I think they could hear me running to the door, because as I approached again, I heard someone running away. When I looked through the peephole again, nobody was there, and when I opened the door, they were gone. So I really had no idea who was doing this or why. I found it strange that they had done it twice, but waited like an hour for the second time. I went back to my game and was hoping that it wouldn't happen again. When I was on the game, there were a few people who I didn't really know there. There's a chat and we can talk to each other on it. About 10 minutes later, I remember that somebody on the game who I didn't know mentioned my username. Then they asked if I had experienced some knocking at my front door. When I read that, I couldn't believe it. I asked who they were and what they were talking about. They simply said, "I got you." I asked again who it was and what was going on. They didn't respond to me though. A short time later, they logged off. I was really creeped out because I had no idea who that was. I also wasn't really friends with anybody who lived in my apartment building or anything like that. It didn't seem like a prank that one of my friends would pull or anything. For the rest of that night, I thought someone was going to knock on my door again, but they didn't. Since then, nothing strange has happened. It's still a mystery to me. Who did that and why? This happened at night in the middle of nowhere about 8 years ago. It was after 11 p.m. and I was taking my dogs out for their last bathroom walk before bed. At the time, I was living in a rural area. Houses far apart, lots of wooded lots around, with wild pigs often crossing our path. I would often take long walks, because one of the dogs had a problem with having accidents in the morning if he didn't have an adequate walk to do all his business. It was dark, so I had the flashlight, and I was not expecting to meet anyone out in the middle of nowhere so late at night. But ahead of me appeared on the opposite side of the road another flashlight. We had a few neighbors, but of the homes around, I knew most all of them from over the years. On rare occasions, someone else may be walking a dog, but I could count the times that happened on my fingers. As I passed by the other flashlight at night, I noticed a tall, pale man who I had never seen before cross the street to my side and began to follow behind me. He yelled out, "Hey, I like your dogs. Can I pet them?" I stayed calm, walking briskly and ignoring him. My house was close, and I was almost home at the end of my walk. He continued to follow me, yelling, "Hey, what's your name? I just want to pet your dogs." He had a thick East European accent. I ignored him and ran up to my house through the door, locked it, and then ran into my bedroom. I told my husband that there was a strange man who had followed me home, and that I was super disturbed that he knew where I lived. My brave husband immediately ran out of the house, I guess to find this guy. I was on pins and needles waiting for him to come back. He came back home with his steel baseball bat in hand. He said he had caught up to the guy and asked him who he was and why he was following around a woman at basically midnight being a creep. The guy said he was new to town and was walking around hoping to meet people and make some friends. Basically, his story was bizarre and totally didn't make sense. You don't do that at midnight in a rural area in the middle of nowhere. You do that in a city setting at a normal hour. My husband told him that if he ever saw him again near our house, he would break his knees with the baseball bat. And I didn't see him again until 2 years later in a neighboring city. I was out with a girlfriend looking at an art museum when I turned a corner and it was him. I could never forget his face. He looked straight at me, and I can't remember exactly what he said, but I knew who he was from that night 2 years ago, which was still very strange. He said something like, "Oh, you're the girl from that night with the dogs." I don't remember what I even said back, because I was in disbelief. The exact same guy, again with the thick European accent, tall, skinny, and pale. This time I had run into him in a public museum, so I can't fault him much since it was a public place. But it was still creepy that he remembered me from the dark night 2 years ago. I grabbed my friend's arm and quickly walked in the opposite direction, and we left the museum. I told her the story as we left the museum, and thankfully she understood. Also thankfully, I never saw him again. When I was 13 and in middle school, my class went to this one wildlife place. It was the first field trip of the year, so it was still very warm outside and there was pretty nice weather. We boarded the bus from school and it took us to this park that had lots of trails. There was also a lot of different types of plants and flowers, which is part of what we were there for. They also had a building and some tour guides who talked to us for a while. I don't remember a ton of details because it was a really long time ago, but I do know that at one point we went outside towards some of the trails. The tour guide was speaking, but taking forever to move from one place to another. We were sort of allowed to walk around and go on our own, but we were supposed to stay in the general area. There were a ton of kids though, so I remember that my friend Austin and I kind of wandered off together. Austin and I were pretty good friends, and we would talk all the time during class. I remember that we went down this trail and it kind of went around the corner. Austin and I just sort of kept walking and we were talking to each other. Before we knew it, we were a long ways from the rest of the class and we were pretty deep into the woods. I didn't really think much of it though, and we just continued to walk down the trail. Eventually, the trail got more and more narrow and the woods became more dense. When we got to that part, both of us heard a noise and some movement coming from deeper in the woods off the trail. We couldn't see where it was coming from exactly, but we decided to go closer, being the curious kids that we were. I think that we were both thinking and expecting it to maybe be some kind of an animal. I know I was. However, after we went off the trail and made it through the trees, we reached a small clearing. Inside that clearing there were these two guys standing by a tree and smoking. I'm not sure what exactly they were smoking, but the guys looked to maybe be in their late teens or so. Austin and I figured that they went into the woods to do drugs and so they wouldn't be seen. So we quickly turned around. The guys did not say anything, and we kept going down the path farther away from our class. We probably should have just gone back right then and there, and I'm not really sure why we didn't, but nevertheless, we continued to go down the path for some time. We talked, and basically we were just bored and wandering around. After like 10 minutes, we reached what was pretty much a dead end. The path made it to this marshland, and there was no bridge or anything. We walked along the edge of it for a while. As we were doing that, we started to hear footsteps behind us on the path. However, they were around a corner in a location that we could not see. They were also pretty far back. The footsteps sort of stopped though. Then, moments later, a rock flew towards us from around the corner. I didn't see at first where it had come from exactly, but a few moments later, I saw somebody come around the corner for just a second and throw another rock. That one went flying towards us and just barely missed. It looked like the guys we had seen who had been smoking. They were now throwing rocks at us. Moments later, the other guy came out and tossed a rock. This throw was much better and got even closer. Austin and I didn't want to wait around any longer. We turned and started running along the marshland. Then we turned and cut through the thick woods, not even going on the path. We knew the basic way to get back to the main area, so we were trying to get there by any means. After running for a while, we soon heard footsteps a ways behind us. I figured that the two guys were chasing us. They were a long ways back, but it made us go even faster. We kept running until we stopped hearing the footsteps. Eventually, we found a path again. Then we continued to lightly jog until we had made it back to the class. They had only moved like 30 feet, and one of the guides was still speaking. I don't think anybody even knew that we had left. I'm not sure who those guys were that we saw, but they seemed to have bad intentions. Maybe they were mad that we saw them doing drugs, or maybe they thought it was just a joke. Either way, I'm glad that we got away from them. I'm a teacher at a high school, and this is my scariest experience from my time on the job. It happened in just my second year of teaching full-time. I had been hired at a high school nearby to where I had grown up. I was really happy to get the job, and the first year had gone well. Most of the students at the school were pretty good. There were a few that were not though, but I feel like most schools that size have them. One day, I was teaching class like any other. After first period was over, in between classes, I would check my cell phone. As I was doing so, I saw that I was receiving a call from an unknown number. I didn't know who it was, so I didn't bother to answer. I put my phone back down on the desk and then prepared for the second class of the day. After teaching that class, I checked my phone again and then saw that the number had left a voicemail. I decided to listen to it. When I played the message, it was what sounded like a younger male's voice, and they were talking in almost a whisper. It was creepy, and the voice simply said, "Answer my calls." Then, literally moments later, the phone started ringing again. Taking the unknown caller's advice, I decided to answer. When I did, I heard that same voice again. He said, "I'm inside the school and I'm gonna get you." Then he hung up. I was really creeped out by this. I didn't know if he was serious or not, but being a new teacher, I felt like I should report it, so I called the principal and let him know about the threat made against me. The principal said that the matter would be looked into immediately. A short time later, a lockdown was announced. I followed through with the procedure for my classroom, and a few minutes after that, there was a knock on the door. Thankfully, it was one of the school staff members to ask me some questions. They talked to me in the room quietly, asking me what happened and stuff. Then they left and said that they were searching the school. The lockdown lasted for about an hour. When it was finally lifted, I was told that nobody suspicious was found inside the school and they thought that I was safe. And for the rest of the day, I was. Nothing strange or creepy happened and I had no more texts or calls. After school, I did some grading and some preparations for the following school day. Then I went home. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment by myself at the time. That night, shortly before I was going to go to bed, there was a really loud knocking on my front door. I was really freaked out immediately. I remembered the threat that I had received at school. Now somebody was at my house. Whoever was there did not knock a second time. After a minute or so, I very carefully got up and walked over to the door. When I looked through the peephole, nobody was there. Whoever had done it must have left. I was really on edge and thought about calling the police, but I decided not to. I was on high alert for the rest of the night, but nothing else happened. It was tough to fall asleep, but eventually I was able to. The next day at school, I found out that the mystery had been solved. The number that I had received calls from had been traced to one of my students. He was a guy who hadn't shown up to class in weeks. I'm not sure if it was a prank or if he was serious, but he was kind of a troublemaker and hung out with a bad crowd. He had already been suspended multiple times and was suspended again for that. The really creepy part is that I'm sure it was him who showed up at my apartment. I have no clue how he got my number or address. Did he follow me home? That might explain the apartment, but still not the phone number. He was never in my class again, as he got expelled shortly after for selling drugs on school grounds. I'm glad that I never saw him again after that. This is something that happened when I was fresh out of college working my first real job. I had several college internships, but this job was one that I had really wanted. I had to move to a completely new state and city, and the interview for the job was intense. But it was a career that I had wanted, and I felt prepared, even though the jobs are pretty competitive. I was not the only person to be hired at this particular company. They hired 5 of us new employees for the department. Most of us were fresh from college. We would have to work our way up the ranks, and I knew that it might get a bit competitive. My goal was to just control what I could control and always work very hard. The company helps new employees get places to live, because it was common for employees to have to move around a lot. So after getting hired, I agreed to move into this new apartment and become roommates with a coworker. It was kind of weird because we were both just hired, and in some ways competing with each other for promotions in the future. The guy that I lived with was named Derek. He seemed pretty normal at first. He kind of gave me the impression that he was a little greedy and selfish though, but other than that he seemed like a pretty normal guy for the most part. We started our new job at the same time and we were kept pretty busy. By the time we would leave work, it would be nighttime. I would pretty much just go back to my room and then go to sleep. Our apartment was fairly nice. It was really new and it had a living room and kitchen in the middle. Then on one side was my bedroom and bathroom and on the other side was Derek's. So we each had our own room and stuff. We didn't really interact with each other much, if at all, around the apartment. We didn't carpool to work or anything either. One time we did though, and he drove, and then he Venmo requested me $5 for gas, even though it was like a 5-minute drive. So I decided not to do that again. After living with Derek for like 2 months and working with him, I didn't like him at all. At work, I didn't interact with him a ton, but being in our group, I'd hear him say stuff. He wasn't a very likable guy. So nothing really crazy happened until like a month into the job. We had both been doing an overall pretty good job at work despite not getting along very well. I was proud of my performance to that point. I would get there early, leave late, and even do work at home sometimes. We had our folders with files and notebooks, as well as stuff on our work laptops. One morning though, I remember that I woke up and almost missed work. My phone was dead, and thankfully I somehow naturally woke up only like 15 minutes later than usual. I was so confused though, because I was sure that I had plugged my phone into charge when I went to bed. I mean, I did that every single night. However, I figured that I must have somehow forgot. I scrambled to get to work and was still on time. Several days later though, I was even closer to being late. I remember that I woke up to my alarm that was going off, except it was right at the time that I would normally leave, so I had no time to get ready at all. I went as quick as I could and was just able to make it. It was such a rush that it wasn't until later that I thought about how that could possibly happen. I would plug in my phone and set my alarm for the same time every morning, so why on earth would it not go off until like an hour later? Or how could I have possibly slept through it for that long? I'm not a deep sleeper. That's when I had the idea that maybe Derek messed with my phone. Maybe he was trying to get me fired or something. The phone couldn't just have the alarm go off so late on its own. That made no sense. So that night when we were both home from work, I told Derek about what happened. I didn't accuse him, but I was just saying how it didn't make any sense. His response really ticked me off. He said, "I don't know, man, that's your problem. Learn how to wake up on time or maybe you shouldn't be working here." So a few days went by without anything strange happening. Then, one morning when I woke up, all my files were out of my folder and on the floor. They had been organized and now they were all out of order, which was pretty important. So I had to reorganize them before work, which almost made me late again. I knew at that point that Derek was messing with me, even though on a slim chance maybe the folder had just fallen off the desk because it had been on the edge of it. But things wouldn't get messed up that much. So that day after work, I accused Derek. I told him to stop messing with me. He said that I was just a disorganized slob and I was crazy for accusing him. I thought about what I could do. I couldn't report Derek to work or anything because I didn't have sure proof, and I knew that Derek would probably make something up about me if I did. So instead, I tried to take measures to prevent Derek from messing with me. I couldn't do anything drastic like stay up all night to try to catch him. I needed to get to bed at a decent time to be up early and get rest. I also couldn't install a lock on my bedroom door because our apartment prohibited it, and for some reason the bedroom doors didn't have locks on them, which makes no sense. Just the bathrooms had locks. So I decided to sleep with my phone under my pillow. That way, if Derek tried to grab it, I would wake up. I also kept my files hidden in my room. One night, I did stay up like an hour later than usual pretending to sleep, hoping to catch Derek, but nothing happened that night. For like a week, things were good. Then, one night, Derek really did it. I woke up to find that my work laptop had been unplugged and was dead. Also, my work clothes, which were a suit and tie, were all wrinkled. It was like somebody had deliberately messed them up. I was so mad that I wanted to punch Derek in the face. I went out into the kitchen area and started yelling at him. He denied everything and then just walked away back to his room and said that he didn't care. I threatened to report him and he said that nobody would believe me. He told me I was delusional. Good thing for me, I had other clothes I could wear and I could charge my laptop just enough before leaving. So I went back to my room and got ready for work. But it was like Derek was trying to sabotage me into getting fired or quitting or something. Or else he just hated me for some reason. I wanted to move out of the apartment badly, but we had a lease, and I couldn't prove that he had done anything wrong really. I wasn't quite sure what to do. I started hiding everything. I was keeping my phone, laptop, and work clothes as well as files hidden. I was putting other things in places where it would be really loud to move them. One night, I actually sort of caught Derek. I woke up to a sound in my room. When I opened my eyes, it was very dark, but I saw movement. I quickly turned on the lamp next to my bed and saw Derek sprinting out of the room. I yelled at him, but he was back in his room within seconds. I got up and followed him out, but he had like a 10-second head start on me. When I got to his room, he was in bed pretending to sleep. I called him out for being in my room, and he pretended that I had just woken him up and got all mad at me. He claimed I was crazy, so I went back to my bedroom at that point. I still didn't have any proof of anything. Over the next few days, nothing else crazy happened. Maybe after that close call for Derek, he decided to take a break from messing with me. But then, something unexpected happened. During the workday, I heard that Derek had been fired. I hadn't seen him in a few hours, and another coworker said that he had been harassing a female coworker. He had violated the rules and was let go. So the rest of the workday after that was several more hours. When I got back home that night, Derek was gone. However, the entire apartment had been trashed. My stuff and the furniture that came with the apartment was all messed up and all over the floor. He smashed the TV, broke several lamps, and tables were tipped over. And my bedroom was the worst. He really took his time with that. I took pictures of all the damage and reported it to the apartment. I was told that Derek would be prosecuted by the apartment as well. After that, I never saw him again. He was definitely the worst coworker as well as roommate that I ever had. One of my coworkers has a super nice gaming room in his house. His name is Luis, and not long after I started working at the company that we both work at, we became friends. We both love video games and play a lot of the same ones. So we talk a lot at work and have hung out a few times, but we mostly play online at different games together. Anyways, I remember the first time that I went to Luis's house, something crazy happened. I went over after work, and Luis had a pretty average looking house in a pretty typical neighborhood. I lived in an apartment about 10 minutes away. After getting inside Luis's house, he showed me his game room. It was and still is the nicest game room that I've ever seen in my life. He converted a spare bedroom, and the entire room had just about every game system that you could ever want. He also had 2 gaming computers, 3 monitors for each one, a racing rig, and about 5 TVs scattered around. The lights are also very cool and can change colors and brightness. I don't even want to know how much money he spent on it, but he said that he's been building it for years and is constantly working on it. Thankfully, his wife seems to like it as well. So I remember that on this night, his wife was there for a while, but then she left to go to a movie with her friends. Luis and I played a bunch of different video games until like 11 o'clock at night. Then I said that I would leave now and I would see Luis next time at work. He said bye and he walked out to the foyer with me, and then I left. After making it out of his house, I went to my car, which was parked across the street on the side of the road. Like right after I got inside my car, I looked to Luis's house and I noticed something. There was a man in his backyard. He was walking to the side of his house, but then went sort of out of my sight. It looked really suspicious, and I kept watching. Soon the man came back into view and sort of moved back into Luis's backyard where I couldn't see him anymore. I decided that I had better give Luis a call and let him know about the guy. So I got out my cell phone and I called Luis while I stayed in my car. However, he did not answer. Knowing him, I figured that he was gaming. I called him again, and still nothing. So I decided to go back. I got out of my car, and even though I was going towards the strange man, I felt like I had to warn Luis. Some suspicious guy was prowling around his property. When I got to his front door, I quickly rang the doorbell. I looked around while I was waiting, and I didn't see or hear anything. I was hoping that the man was gone. Then I tried the door, and it was still unlocked. Luis, I guess, never locked it after I left. I went inside and then closed and locked the door behind me. I went directly for Luis's gaming room, which is where I saw him at one of his PCs, sure enough with his headset on. When I entered the room, he turned around and said, "What's up, man? Did you forget something?" I told him how I saw a suspicious-looking man in his yard. He finally paused his game and seemed interested in what was going on. We both left the room to go look out of the window, and literally just as we were doing that, we heard the doorknob to the front door of the house start to turn. Thankfully, I had just locked it, so it didn't open. Luis had no idea who it would be, and we both went over to one of the front windows and looked out. When we did, we just barely saw the guy moving back towards the rear of the house. Luis went around and started turning on every light in the house as well as every outside light as well. When we did this, within a minute we heard someone running outside. I went to the front window and I saw a man jogging away down the street and quickly going out of view. After that, I left, and Luis was glad that I'd come back to warn him and also that I locked the door. Looking back, I think the guy was probably trying to get in the house to steal stuff. I'm not sure if he knew Luis or not, but I'm really glad that I went back and locked the door. This happened to me when I was a freshman in college in a small town in the South. I had a terrible college experience in general, but this experience was part of that. To set the scene, I lived in a building of suites with a parking garage attached to it. There were probably 4 or 5 levels to the garage. The top level of this parking garage was ground level. The suite building was maybe a 5-minute walk down a sidewalk to the entrance of the suites. There was a little room with windows that housed the elevator close to the sidewalk. My boyfriend at the time lived off campus, and I hated being on campus so much for reasons I will not get into, so I spent a lot of time at his house in a neighboring town. I had an 8 a.m. class, so I would usually go back to my suite at some point in the night or early morning. One night, I got back around 2 a.m. The parking garage was pretty full this night, and I had to park at the end farthest from the building, closer to the ramp that went to the lower level. I'm terrified of being inside parking garages, so I always parked on top. It was pretty dark, and usually I would call my sister or boyfriend if I was ever spooked, but this night was normal and I didn't feel the need to bother anyone so late. I was almost to the sidewalk when I noticed someone in the little room where the elevator was. They had been behind the wall, but I saw them emerge. He had not just come out of the elevator, as I would have seen the doors open through the windows. I didn't get a great look at the person, but I could tell that it was a middle-aged man. I found it odd that he was on campus so late, as all the people living in the building were young and mainly freshmen. I tried my best to just ignore the person and continue on my way, but as I reached the sidewalk about 20 feet past the little room, he came out and started walking behind me. I tried to be rational and not freak out, but the further I walked, the more I realized he was getting closer to me. There was one of those posts where you could hit a button for campus police, but something inside me told me that I had to not let him know that I knew he was there and that he was scaring me. In a few seconds, I had to make a decision. I just started sprinting down the sidewalk. I immediately heard him pick up his speed and start running as well. He was chasing me. There were 3 entrances to the building, and I usually used the farthest one because my room was on the far side of the building. However, as soon as I got to the first entrance, I quickly swiped my card, entered, and slammed the door shut behind me. He was right there on the other side of the doors. He made eye contact for a second or two, and then he ran the other way away from my view. I was so scared, and to this day, I wonder what his intentions were. It's probably for the best that I don't find out. The next morning, I woke up to an email from my school about a strange man that had been spotted on campus. It still gives me the creeps when I think about it. When I was in high school during my junior year, I took an elective advanced computer class. It was not a very popular class and only had 5 students in it total. I was one of the 5, and our teacher was a really chill guy who was also the head basketball coach. My school had a really good basketball team, and he was always talking basketball and talking to the other coaches. We were all pretty good students, so he gave us a lot of independence. He would teach maybe 1 or 2 days a week, and then we would work on the computers for the rest of the week. Not much would be said, and he would play music and let us work most of the time. And when we got done and had free time, we could just play around on the computers. There were times where either an assistant basketball coach would come into our classroom, or our teacher would leave and go to theirs. They would quietly talk strategy for literally the entire class period sometimes. It never bothered me. In fact, I liked it, because being able to just get my work done on the computer was nice. The teacher didn't care if we went around on our phones either. The classroom was a smaller computer lab, and it was kind of out of the way in one of the long hallways near the end of the school. One day, all 5 of us students arrived for class like usual. Our teacher went over the plan for the day, and then he said that he would be back in a bit. He was going to one of the assistant coaches' rooms to talk strategy again. All of us got to work and began doing our assignments. About 30 minutes later, there was an announcement over the school intercom. It said that the school was being locked down and for teachers to follow the lockdown procedures. After this, the 5 of us kind of looked around at each other. We were sort of confused as to what we should do. I didn't know if we were supposed to get up and go lock the door and stuff, or if our teacher would return. We all figured that he would be back soon though, so none of us did anything. After like 5 minutes went by, one of the other students got up and turned the lights off. We still figured that the teacher would come back soon though. After like 10 more minutes, there was still nothing. Then we heard footsteps in the hallway. I expected it to be the teacher. A short time later, the door opened. We were all sitting at the back side of the classroom behind computers and facing the front. What we saw was a man enter the room who was not our teacher. I just remember that he had a messy beard, long stringy hair, and looked somewhat disheveled, wearing a black jacket and jeans. He entered the room and then took a few steps in. Then he looked around and seemed to notice us. As soon as he looked at us, he said, "Nobody say a word." The way he said it was really threatening. I was honestly pretty scared. The man paced back and forth, looking at us for a few seconds. Then he said, "Am I understood?" We all nodded our heads, not knowing what the guy was capable of. Then he walked over to the door and looked out of the window into the hallway. It looked like he was keeping watch and hiding. We all just sat there, frozen in fear pretty much. The guy would look out of the door window for a while, then pace around a little bit, look at us, then return to the door window. This went on for like 5 minutes. I didn't notice hearing anything else in the hallway during this time or anything. Then the man went to the door, opened it, and ran out. As soon as he was gone, another student ran over to the door and locked it. Then I think we all called 911 at once. We reported the guy, knowing that he was more than likely the cause for the school lockdown. We were told that the police were there already and inside of the school searching for him. About 20 minutes later, the lockdown was lifted. Shortly after, our teacher returned. The man was caught and arrested after trying to escape the school. Why he was there in the first place, I never found out. Our teacher was watching film with another coach on the complete opposite end of the school. He tried to walk back to us, but the police stopped him, saying that he was walking where the suspicious man had been. The cops had been called earlier after another teacher saw the guy and he allegedly threatened him. So we were kinda left there wondering what to do, and unfortunately we did not lock the door. Thankfully, nobody was harmed though. This is something that happened back when I was in high school. I was a senior at the time, and one night I was at Chick-fil-A with some of my friends. It was a very nice night, and we were sitting outside. There were 4 of us, me, Jenny, Adam, and Cole. We were sitting around talking and having a good time. It was somewhat late, maybe almost 10 p.m., so things were fairly quiet. I remember that at one point I saw this man riding his bike down the nearby street and into the parking lot for the Chick-fil-A. The guy was wearing all black and was also wearing a hat and these sort of glasses that looked like goggles. Right away, to me, he seemed kind of strange. The guy ended up riding into the parking lot and then circling it a few times. Eventually, he parked his bike. I thought that he was going to go inside or something, but he just kind of stood around by the bike. I noticed what he was doing because I was sitting at the table in an angle that faced him. I just remember that the guy was standing next to his bike for a while, but then I never really paid more attention to him because I was talking to my friends. At some point a while later, I noticed that the guy was gone. I hadn't really been paying that close of attention to him or anything, so soon after, we all left. I lived really close to the Chick-fil-A, maybe like a 5-minute drive from there. So I got in my car and I drove back home where I lived with my parents and brother. When I got back home, I went inside, and then minutes later saw the guy on the bike again. I noticed him out the front window of our house, and he was riding slowly down the street on his bike. At first, I thought that it was just a really crazy coincidence that I was seeing him again. Our street was pretty quiet most of the time, and would occasionally get bike riders, but I had never noticed this man before. I kept watching out the front window, and the guy rode his bike back a few seconds later. Before long, it appeared as though he was just kind of riding his bike back and forth in front of our house. It seemed pretty strange. I quickly dismissed the thought that he had somehow followed me or even knew who I was though, because that seemed way too crazy and far-fetched. I certainly didn't know this guy, and I hadn't noticed him when I was driving home or anything. After watching him ride his bike back and forth in front of our house for a while, I was just about to go away. But then, I noticed him slow his bike down and then go just past our house. Then he made a right and turned into our driveway. Now this was really weird. After going into the driveway, he was out of my sight, so I moved to try to get to another window where I could see him. However, when I reached a window near the area he had gone, I didn't see anything. By this time, I knew something was up, so I went to find my parents. They were in the basement watching a movie. I told them basically what was going on. I remember that my dad came upstairs and then went outside the front door to look around. I followed him outside, and we saw the guy's bike propped up against the garage door, but the man was nowhere in sight. My dad took the guy's bike and then wheeled it to the front door and then brought it in our house. I'm not sure why. Then after we went back inside, I heard my mom say that she saw the guy in the backyard. Apparently he had moved from behind the garage to the other end of the yard. We looked out the back windows but could no longer see him. My mom called the police at that point. For some reason, this guy was prowling around outside the house. We kept looking out the window but didn't see him. Our yard was decent sized, and we had a good amount of trees and bushes, and he could have gone into a neighbor's property as well. It also wasn't very well lit back there either. When the police got there, we reported what happened, and they looked around a little, but the guy was not found. However, we still had his bike. I remember that my dad put up an ad on Craigslist for the man to come and get his bike and explain himself. However, nobody answered the ad. I think to this day my parents still have the guy's bike. Thankfully, he never tried to break in or anything. One time back when I was in high school, one of my classes went on a field trip to a history museum. It was a history class and there were about 30 kids in it. One of those kids in particular was a guy who I really didn't like at all, and he didn't like me either. For this story, I'm just going to call him John. So John was always kind of a jerk. He was a bully and a troublemaker. When he was in class, he would always sit in the back and usually sleep for the whole hour, or secretly vape by sticking his head in his shirt. During my freshman year, I had to be his partner on a class project, and he was rude to me and unfair the whole time. That's kind of what led to us being sort of enemies, and for some reason, we always seemed to have classes together. In this history class, I would just try to avoid him. I know that he had gotten suspended at one point for actually punching another kid in the school. I didn't think that it was worth my time to fight him though. I was a member of the high school baseball team and I didn't want to get in trouble. John wasn't involved in any activities, so he had nothing to lose, I guess. Anyways, we went on this field trip to the history museum. There were lots of exhibits and things to look at. It was pretty much what you would expect from a history museum, and at one point we were free to roam around the museum how we wanted to. So I remember that there was this one exhibit in particular of like an old town. There was a glass wall with railing a little more than waist high. I was looking at the town and sort of leaning over to see better because it was a very cool exhibit. It was kind of like those train cities that people build, but this was of an old-fashioned town, so there was a lot of things to look at. I remember that in the middle of this, all of a sudden, I felt someone sort of grab me from behind and push me over. As I was falling, I saw that it was John who had pushed me. I fell over the railing and right next to the city. By extreme luck, I didn't break anything. I had mostly landed next to the city. However, I knocked over a few of the buildings and stuff on the edge of it, but mostly things were fine. When I looked up, John was far off, like 15 feet away now, and sort of laughing. As I started to get up, I saw that everyone in the room was now looking at me. It was very embarrassing. The lady who worked at the museum got mad and started to yell at me. I started to pick up the things that fell over and was told to stop and not touch anything. She told me to get out of there, so I did. The lady seemed to not see that I had been pushed, and it appeared as though she had the impression that I had just jumped in to be funny or something. She scolded me, and I told her that I had been pushed, but for some reason she didn't seem to believe me. I looked over to John and said that he had pushed me over. By now, John was on the complete other side of the room, and he was walking away even farther. I was so mad, and I went over to find John, but by that point he had left the room. I found another kid who I knew, and I told him how John had pushed me over. The kid said that he didn't see it, but at least he seemed to actually believe me. Apparently, nobody else in the room had seen me get pushed and didn't really know what had happened. As the day went on at the History Museum, I didn't see John for almost the entire rest of the time. I was kind of glad that I didn't see him, but I also wanted to give him a piece of my mind. So finally, when the field trip was over and we were about to leave, I saw John again. By that time, I had cooled down, and I decided to just ignore him and not confront him or anything. So we all boarded the bus back and went back to school. When we arrived back, it was just in time for our final classes of the day. I remember that I got to my class, which was some type of a science class, I think. I sat next to one of my good friends, and when I got there, he asked me about the field trip. Then he showed me this Snapchat story that he had seen. It was a story that John had posted on his Snapchat. I hadn't seen it because I wasn't friends with John on Snapchat. Anyways, the post was of him sitting in the back of the bus, taking a selfie holding this old hat that he had stolen from the museum. The hat was in one of the exhibits, I remember, because one of the tour guides told a story about how it's really old and authentic. I couldn't believe that John had stolen it, but it also didn't surprise me knowing him. I talked with my friend about how John had pushed me into the exhibit and stuff. The next day at history class, our teacher had found out that somebody had stole the hat, but he didn't know who. Apparently nobody else knew who did it either, besides me. When class started, our teacher told us how the museum told him somebody stole the hat, and they didn't know who. Our teacher then said that somebody had to step up and confess, but everyone was silent. Of course, I wasn't going to rat out John in front of everyone. I was planning to after class, though. After the teacher's speech, we resumed, and unfortunately, in the long class period, I forgot about telling the teacher how John had stolen it. I just moved on with my day and went to my next class. I'm not sure how many people had John on Snapchat, if anybody in the class even did at all. So I remember that later on in the school day, I was at my locker putting my books away. Some other kid who I barely knew started calling my name. He was like halfway down the hall, and I knew who he was, but we were not friends. I had no idea why he was calling me, so I walked over to him. When I got there, he brought up how I had taken a spill at the museum, and he started laughing about it. I told him that John had pushed me, and he just thought it was so funny. So at that point, I just walked back over to my locker. After the next class, I went to my locker again, but when I got my other book, I saw the hat. That same stolen hat had been hidden behind my large science book in my locker. I realized then that John must have planted it there. It must have been when the other kid called me over. They probably were in on it together. Now John was trying to plant stolen goods on me. I didn't want to get in trouble or anything, and I was really angry, so I took the hat and went straight to my history teacher's classroom. When I got there, I told him the whole story. I was afraid that he wouldn't believe me, but thankfully he did. He knew that I was a pretty good student, and he knew that John wasn't. He also reported that one of the students had reported to him that she had seen John's Snapchat story. I gave the hat to him, and he returned it to the museum. I remember that John ended up getting suspended for a week for that. After that school year, John dropped out of our school. I'm glad that I didn't have to deal with him anymore. For a stretch of about 6 months a long time ago, I worked at a Chick-fil-A. I was a 17-year-old girl at the time, and was just about to graduate from high school. So the story really starts one time when I was working on a Saturday. I had started work in the morning and was working until sometime in the afternoon. I don't remember exactly when. But towards the end of my shift, I was working at the front counter taking orders. I saw this man start to approach me and I greeted him. Instead of ordering right away though, he just started to talk to me. The man asked me how I was doing and how work had gone. At first, I thought he was just being friendly and I was happy to answer his questions, although I did get a sort of bad feeling about him for some reason. The man continued to talk to me though and ask me more questions. He asked when I got off and I told him that I would be off in just a few minutes. Then he started asking more personal questions. He asked if I had a boyfriend, asked if I lived around there, and he asked if I was in school. By like the 5th question, I was getting kind of weirded out by it and wondering if he was going to order. After talking to the man and answering his questions, giving as little information as possible for like 2 minutes, I asked him what he wanted to order. By now, another man had already entered and got in line behind the first guy. The man then started asking me about the menu like he had never been there before. He asked me what my favorite thing was and what the best sellers were and stuff. He talked to me about the menu for about another minute or two at least. He was asking tons of questions, and by that point somebody else was also waiting in line now, so he was holding them up. The guy was now seeming creepy to me and not just friendly. Some people are very talkative, but they're just friendly. This guy didn't come across that way. Finally, after talking to me about myself and the menu for a total of at least 5 minutes, he ordered. The guy just got a Diet Coke, and that was it. It almost made me wonder why he even came to Chick-fil-A if all he was going to do was order a Diet Coke. So the man got his order pretty quickly, and then I continued with helping the next customers. A line had formed because of the man taking so long. I was kept busy for the next 5 minutes or so taking orders from these people, but at one point I looked up and I saw the guy was still there. He was just standing by the doors drinking his Diet Coke and kind of looking at me. I kept an eye on him and he still hadn't left like 5 minutes later after that. Then I thought that maybe he was waiting for me. I got off in just a few minutes from now and I had told him that. Why else would he just be standing by the doors? It definitely looked like he was waiting for someone. I just hoped that wasn't the case. I kept working until I was finally off a very short time later. I went back and clocked out and stuff. When I went to leave the Chick-fil-A, the man was still standing right by the doors. As soon as I walked out, he turned and started walking out with me. He asked me if I was glad to be off work. I said yes, and then told the man to have a good night, indicating that we were going our separate ways. But the man did not seem happy with that. He asked if I needed a ride home, and I said no thanks, I drove. Then he asked me if I lived around there. I completely ignored his question and just said good night, and it was only like 3 p.m. Then I went to my car and didn't look back. The man thankfully did not follow me to my car or anything. When I had made it inside, I felt very relieved and could not believe how strange that was. Then I started to drive home. But when I did, the guy started to follow me. I never had the idea that he would try to follow me home. I figured he had already left. But when I began driving back, I noticed a car behind me. It was daytime, so I could sort of see pretty good who was behind the wheel, and it was the same man. I just hoped at first that it was a coincidence, but the closer I got to my house, he was still behind me. I lived in a very large neighborhood. There were tons of streets with many houses on each of them. It was a neighborhood that was easy to get lost in if you had never been there before. So when I entered the neighborhood, I did not go to my house, but just started driving around instead. I kept randomly turning and going up and down just about every street. The man stayed with me for probably the first 5 minutes or so. Then he eventually turned off and left me alone. After that, I finally went to my house and was very careful to make sure that I didn't see the guy and he was not following me. I think that the man must have realized that I knew he was following me and that I wasn't going to actually go to my house, so he gave up. That was pretty crazy looking back. I'm just thankful that I never saw him for the rest of my time working at Chick-fil-A. He was a really creepy guy. When I was an 18-year-old in my first year of college, I had a terrifying experience in a dorm room. This happened on a Saturday night. My friend Leah and I attended a football game. We got bored and decided to head to a haunted house with a group of friends. It was a haunted corn maze and we had a blast. Eventually, the night started to wind down. Leah and I had decided to go back to our friend Terry's dorm room suite so the hangout could continue. We had dyed Leah's hair and we were watching a movie when there were 3 loud slams on the door. Terry's roommate went to answer the door. We heard someone grunt and then saw a man who none of us knew walk past Terry's room door and into the bathroom. We were all so confused and we poked our heads out the door to see Terry's roommate on the floor. The man had pushed him to the ground just to enter the common area of the room. All of us agreed that we didn't know the man. We started laughing and making jokes about the situation because that's how we coped with it at the time. Terry's roommate went to tell the front desk that somebody had come into our room and started taking a shower. Again, it was a Saturday night, so we just assumed that the man was drunk or something and he was in the wrong room. Eventually, though, we started to hear rustling in the bathroom and loud scratches and bangs coming from the door. We started to get scared, so we locked ourselves in Terry's room. Eventually, we heard the bathroom door open and we all turned towards the locked door. We all jumped up as the man began to bang on the door with his fists. He was breathing so heavily that we could hear it from the other side of the door. Leah and I screamed as the banging proceeded to get louder and louder as he began to throw his full weight into the door. At first, we thought he was just a drunk guy, but no guy who's hammered out of his mind has enough coordination to take a running start into a door. Finally, the banging stopped. We thought that the man had left, but we didn't dare leave the room. It was silent for 3 minutes, and then the scratching started. This man was scraping his fingernails down the door like a dog trying to be let into a house. He whispered, "Let me in, please, please. I know you're in there." He began to yell and bang on the door again. How was no one else on this dorm floor hallway coming to help us? Fear was crawling up my body. I have a stress disorder that I take medication for, and this was not the situation for me to be in. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor with my head in my hands to try to calm myself. It had been almost 10 minutes since Terry's roommate went to get campus security. We finally called the front desk of the dorm. Apparently, they had already called security the minute the roommate got down there. How was it taking them this long to get here? The man continued to throw himself into the door for another 10 minutes. We thought the thing was going to break, he slammed into it so much. But finally, after 25 minutes, campus security arrived. They sat the man down and started to have a conversation with him instead of taking him out of the dorm room. At this point, I was getting frustrated at campus security for how long it had taken them to arrive and for how they were handling it. The man told them he hadn't been drinking and that he hadn't smoked anything and that he was fine. They continued to question him, and with each question, he began to get more violent. They finally were able to escort the man out, but not before he scuffled with one of the cops, and we heard all this through the door of the room that we were hiding in. Campus security knocked on our door, telling us that it was safe to come out. When we opened the door, something hit the floor. The cop's eyes widened when he realized what it was. It was a pocket knife that had been lodged in the door. Not only did it take these people 25 minutes to show up, but they also didn't check the man or the surrounding area to see if there was a weapon. The security decided to check the rest of the dorm, and lo and behold, they found a crumpled up ball of tinfoil with what they concluded to be meth in it. This dude was out of his mind on meth with a pocket knife, trying to get into the room we were hiding in. We all complained to the school the next week about how the situation was handled, mainly because we saw the same man walking around campus again about a week later. Thankfully, we had no more problems involving the meth man, but I would see him on campus periodically during the remainder of my year of school. This is something that happened back when I was in high school. It was my sophomore year, and I went to a pretty average-sized school. One day, my third-hour class ended, which I had with my best friend Josh. It was now study hall, which I had in another classroom that was on the second floor. Josh had another class at the other end of the school. Josh and I walked together to our lockers, which were down in the commons area on the first floor. The hallways were already pretty quiet during this time. As we walked down the stairs, we were talking to each other and taking our time. It didn't really matter if we were late to study hall, because it wasn't a real class. You would just sit there and do homework or go on your phone the whole time, and the teachers didn't really do anything. So when we got to our lockers, there weren't really any other students around. We were still talking, and we heard a sound come over the school intercom that was not just the typical bell sound. However, I didn't really hear it. We were mid-conversation, and when we heard some talking over the intercom, we quieted down. I didn't catch it, and I asked Josh what the announcement was. He said it was a lockdown drill, so we continued talking. Josh then said that he was going to his class and walked away. After hearing there was a lockdown drill, I didn't really want to go to my classroom right away. I figured that it would be weird to walk in during a lockdown drill, so I would just stay in the hallways until it was over. The drills usually only lasted like 5 minutes anyways. My teacher would figure out that I just went to another room for the drill probably. So I started to walk slowly down the hallways, taking my time. It was now completely empty and also silent. I did want to avoid anybody else in the hallways though, because I didn't want to get in trouble for being in the hallways during a lockdown drill. As I slowly walked down a nearby hallway, I heard footsteps a ways behind me approaching. So I moved down the hallway and then turned to the left. I started quietly walking down this hallway, which was very long. I hoped that the footsteps would move away. Unfortunately, they didn't. I heard the footsteps continuing to get close to me. I started walking down the hallway as quickly as I could as the footsteps approached the corner, but there was really nowhere to go, so I decided to quickly find a place to hide. I went in between a row of lockers out of desperation. I was out of the person's sight for now, but when they got even with me in the hallway, they would be able to see me. My heart was racing, and I didn't know what was going to happen. The footsteps got into the hallway, and I was sure that it was a hall monitor or a teacher and that I would be in trouble. I decided to look and see who it was, but when I did, it was not who I expected. I saw that there was a man walking down the hallway that I did not recognize. He wasn't a teacher or anything like that, and certainly not a student. It was some guy just wearing a sweatshirt and jeans. He was walking down the hallway and in my direction, but didn't seem like he knew that I was there. As he got closer and closer, I was starting to wonder what was going on. Maybe it wasn't a lockdown drill after all, but an actual lockdown. The man got within probably 50 feet of me. Then he stopped right in front of several lockers. What he did next was very unexpected. The man climbed on top of the lockers, now standing where he had to crouch to not hit his head on the ceiling. He proceeded to remove one of the ceiling tiles and then crawled up into it, going into the ceiling. I couldn't believe what I had seen. I quickly left my hiding place and then sprinted down the hallway all the way to my classroom. When I got there, I banged on the door and I was let in by my teacher. He asked me where I had been, and I told him that I saw a guy go into the ceiling. He called the vice principal, and I later talked with him about it. The school was locked down for over an hour. Eventually, they found the man. He was a guy who had been living in the school for several days. He was able to move around in the ceilings and in back hallways. The school was kind of old and outdated, and had a decent amount of places he could hide, I guess. It was really creepy. When I was in college, I got matched with a random roommate my first year. I was new to the university, and it was a pretty large school. My roommate was this guy named Matthew. Instantly, he seemed a little strange. Really, he just seemed unfriendly. He did not seem shy or awkward at all. It was like he just didn't want to talk to me. And that was apparent pretty much right away, so I kinda just did my own thing. We did not have any classes together or anything, so we'd just be gone during the day and come back later. Then we would do homework or whatever on our separate sides of the room, and nobody would say anything. I got used to it after a few days, and it was fine with me for the most part. Overall, besides the communication, he was a good roommate. Both of our sides of the room were clean, and he wasn't loud or crazy or anything. And on most weekends, he would go home. So I would have the entire room to myself, which was nice. So, about 2 months or so into the school year, something really weird happened one night. I got back to the dorm at like 8 p.m. I had been in the dining hall and then hung out with some friends in a lounge area and did some homework. When I got back, Matthew appeared to be gone. I didn't see him in the room. A few hours went by and he still wasn't there. By now, it was getting to be time to go to bed. I still didn't really think much of it though. I was just hanging out, sitting at my desk in the corner and playing video games with my headset on. At about 11 o'clock, I got tired and then was going to go to bed. However, that's when I was looking around the room and I noticed something. I saw movement under Matthew's bed, and then I realized Matthew was there. He was hiding under his bed. He had a mini fridge under there as well as a large storage box, so it was hard to see, but he was behind them. I was so confused. He had been there for hours now, and I hadn't heard a peep or seen him. It also seemed like he was looking at me. I called him out, asking what he was doing hiding under the bed. He came out and then played it off as a game. He said that he just wanted to see if I would notice him, and he gave a kind of nervous laugh. I said, yeah, but for 3 hours? He then said that he was going to bed and left the room to brush his teeth. I was weirded out by the whole thing, but what could I do? For a few weeks, nothing else strange happened that I was aware of. It was pretty much the normal routine, and we still didn't talk much or anything. But then, one night, I remember that we both went to bed at around the same time. All the lights went out and I fell asleep pretty quickly. The next thing I knew, I was waking up randomly in the night. I didn't know why I had woken up. All the lights were still off, and I didn't hear anything. But then, I got the sense that I was being watched, and my eyes slowly started to adjust to the dark. I turned over in bed to get more comfortable, and that's when I saw Matthew standing there. He was holding something in his hands. It looked like a hammer, and he was sort of holding it up, almost as if he was going to hit me or something. He was standing just a couple of feet from my bed. I jumped back in bed when I saw him as a reaction. He moved away back towards his bed at that point. Then I asked him what on earth he was doing. He said that he was just fixing his bed. I was just like, what? He said that there was a loose nail in his bed and he was trying to fix it quietly but didn't want to wake me up. I didn't believe it for a second. He then said that he thought he might have woken me up, so we went over to see. I just said okay and tried to act normal because this guy had a weapon in his hands and I didn't want to make him angry. He said sorry and then put the hammer down and went in his bed. I couldn't fall asleep after that for the longest time. I mean, if on the slightest of chances what he was saying was true, then why would he be hammering in the pitch dark? The next morning I went and requested to move out and get my own dorm room. Those things take time though, so I would have to continue living with Matthew. I should have reported him, but I didn't want to at the time. I didn't know what his deal was, but I just wanted to stay away from him. For the next few nights, things were fine. Then, much sooner than I expected, I was granted a new room. So one day, when Matthew was gone, I just moved all my stuff and left. I never saw him again. This happened back during my senior year of high school. For this particular semester, I remember that I didn't have a class during first period. This was a common thing for seniors, and it meant that I could wake up late and show up to school when first period was almost over. It always felt really nice to do that because I had been getting up super early for years. So one day, I arrived at school with about 10 minutes or so left in first period. I entered the school and then began walking the empty hallways to my locker. When I was doing this though, I heard over the school intercom that there was a lockdown. Now, I didn't really know what to do in this situation because I didn't have a class to go to, so I decided to just go into the bathroom, which looking back was a stupid decision. Obviously, I should have just found a random classroom, but that's easy to say now. I didn't know why there was a lockdown, but I thought that I could just go into a bathroom and hopefully school would resume shortly. After getting inside, there was silence for a minute or so. Then I heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. I thought that most likely it was a teacher, and I was slightly wondering if I would get in trouble if they saw me. But I wasn't too worried, because I would just explain how I had just got there and I wasn't in a class yet. The footsteps approached the bathroom that I was in, but they walked right past it. They went down the hallway and got quieter and quieter. I felt relieved that they had passed, but then they seemed to turn around. I heard the footsteps moving back and now heading in my direction again. I wondered why they had turned around. I also wondered who it was out there. I thought about going to see, but just had a bad feeling about it and decided not to. So I stayed where I was, and once more the footsteps got closer, but now they were from the other direction. Once more they passed right by the bathroom that I was in and continued down the hallway. This time they went just out of earshot and then they turned around. Once more they walked towards the bathroom and went past it. Then they passed the bathroom 2 or 3 more times. It was like somebody was out there pacing back and forth down the hallway in front of the bathrooms. I found it really strange, and other than those footsteps, everything was completely silent. Finally, they walked away and I stopped hearing them entirely. So this time, I decided that I wanted to get away from there. I was going to leave the bathroom and just go to the room where my first class of the day would be and hope to be let in. So after not hearing anything for like over a minute, I left the bathroom and went out into the hallway. However, as soon as I got there, I saw a man standing in the hallway right in the middle of it a ways down. The man was wearing a suit and a tie, but I did not recognize him to work at the school. He was not looking at me, but staring straight ahead. And the creepiest part is that he had this really large, fake-looking grin on his face. The whole sight was very unsettling. Then the man started to walk towards me slowly. He still wasn't looking at me and not walking directly at me, but in the general direction that I was in. He remained in the center of the hallway as he walked. I was so freaked out that I just took off running as fast as I could in the opposite direction. I went all the way to the end of the hallway, turned, and then ran down another one. Then I sprinted to the classroom where I had my next class period and banged on the door desperately. After a few moments, the teacher came to the door, saw me, recognized me, and let me in. I told several students as well as the teacher about the strange man that I saw. They all thought that it was really weird, but nobody seemed to know why the school was locked down, but I assumed him to be the reason. We all waited in the classroom for another 30 minutes or so, and then finally the lockdown was over. Then the school day was resumed as normal. The strange thing is that I never got a good explanation as to what the lockdown was for. I didn't get confirmation that it was for that man that I saw, but I can only assume. I heard multiple things, but nothing confirming anything. It was really strange. Something really crazy happened when I was in college. So, during my freshman year, I got paired with another girl to live with in the dorms. We were supposed to be roommates and share what was a pretty standard dorm room. I met her on move-in day and she seemed alright. Her name was Sydney, and overall I didn't know much about her. We only briefly talked that first day, and she seemed to be gone a lot for the next few days. I had some classes and other stuff, but even when I was back at the dorm, I didn't see her much. Finally, when she got back from her classes on like the second or third day, I talked with her for like 10 or 20 minutes to get to know her. She seemed fairly uninterested, but overall was not rude or anything. For the next couple of weeks, she would be gone like all the time. She would pretty much just get back really late and then go to sleep. Most of the times, she would get back after I was already asleep. I would only know she was back because I would either wake up from her getting back, or I would get up the next morning and she would still be sleeping. Then one day, I came back from my classes, and all Sydney's stuff was just gone. It was like she had completely moved out. I figured that she had dropped out of the school or something. She hadn't said anything to me at all. Maybe she had gotten another room perhaps. I didn't know anything about it, but we had exchanged numbers when we first met, so I texted her asking what had happened. However, she never responded. I was kind of happy about this, because she was gone all the time anyways. Now I had the whole room to myself, and I had made some other friends there as well. Over the next few days, I rearranged the room, because now I had twice as much space as before. It was great, and I really enjoyed it. For the rest of the semester, I had the entire room to myself, and into the second semester as well. I even got a little more furniture now that I had my own place. So now, fast forward to almost the end of the school year. It was like April, and I was woken up in the middle of the night to the sound of my door opening. I was really creeped out. I was sure that I had locked the door. It was completely dark, so I didn't know who it could be. I looked over and saw a figure entering my room, but couldn't make out who it was. I was terrified. Then the lights turned on, and I saw Sydney standing there. It was the biggest surprise ever. She said, "What the F did you do to the room?" I said, "Where were you the last 6 months?" Sydney had a backpack and several bags with her. She said that she was at her boyfriend's in a tone as if I was stupid for not knowing that. Duh, I guess. I didn't know that she even had a boyfriend or anything, and she never responded to my text when I asked her what happened. I told her that I didn't know that and how I had texted her, but she said that she must have not got it. She started unpacking her things right there, and then I had to move all my stuff back to my side of the room. I was so mad. Even though it was late in the school year, I requested a new room the next day and was able to get one pretty shortly after. Sydney, as it turns out, had never dropped out of the school, and she still had a key to the room. She had moved in with her boyfriend and had lived with him the entire time. I guess they broke up, and she just moved right back in the middle of the night, mind you. Well, I found out later that she failed like 8 classes and ended up dropping out anyways. It was really scary though when she just entered my room out of nowhere in the middle of the night. My name is Amelia, and I have a very scary experience that I would like to share. So, it all started about 3 years ago when I moved into a new apartment. I needed a roommate to be able to afford the rent, so I found this girl on Craigslist to live with me named Sarah. She was the same age as me and seemed pretty nice at first. Our apartment was not in the best part of town, and the apartment wasn't that great either. We had a 12-month lease, and about a month in, I was fortunate enough to get a much better job. So I was making more decent money now, and I could not wait for the lease to be up so that I could get my own place. I would also be able to get a place that was a little bit nicer. Now, Sarah was overall a decent roommate. She worked at a gas station in town, but some of her friends seemed kind of sketchy. They would come over here and there. Sarah and I really didn't become friends, but we were friendly enough with each other for the most part. So, I remember that at one point Sarah got fired from her job. I would just see her around the apartment all the time, and when I asked her, she said that she had gotten fired like a month ago. I told her sorry, and I hoped that she could find another job and stuff. Now, a while after this, one night I was home by myself because Sarah was gone. It wasn't that unusual, and I didn't really know or care where she was. But when it was getting late, I got a text message from her asking if I could give her a ride. I asked her where she was. Then she called me. When I answered, she appeared to be crying, and said that I needed to come and get her now. I asked her what was going on, and she said that she didn't know where she was and she was stranded. Then she said that she would send me her location. So she sent it to me from her phone. When I looked, it appeared as though she was in a park by a lake. I said that I would come and get her and asked her why she was there and what happened. Between sobs, she said that she was going to her new job and her car broke down, but she got out to walk. Then she said that she got lost. That's all she gave me. I hadn't known that she had gotten a new job, and clearly she was very emotional. I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I figured that I should try to help her out. So I got in my car and began driving to the location. It wasn't that far away, only like 5 minutes. I had never been to that park before though. It was off a quiet road, and when I entered and got into the parking lot, it was completely empty and very dark. There was just a couple of dim streetlights in the far corners of the parking lot. Past the parking lot there were a few trails, but I couldn't really see anything. Most of them went into the woods. I called Sarah and asked her where exactly in the park she was. She told me that she went down the path kind of far and got lost. I was starting to get annoyed. I was looking at her location on the phone, and I didn't know if it was 100% pinpoint accurate, but it looked like she was a little bit farther in. So I started walking down the path, and it was honestly pretty creepy. I was pretty sure that the park was now closed, and I didn't even know if I was allowed to be there. So I kept walking and hoped that I would hear or see Sarah. I called out to her a few times, but heard nothing. I was following the location and trying to figure out where on the paths I should go. I kept going. Then I suddenly heard a noise not that far away. I stopped and called for Sarah. No one answered me. I didn't know if maybe it was an animal or another person. I looked to the spot. Things were silent for a few moments. Then, out of nowhere, I saw this man emerge from the woods and start walking towards me. I heard footsteps down another path nearby that connected, and looked over to suddenly see another man. I had no idea who they were, but they both looked sketchy and walking right towards me. I had a bad feeling about it and turned around. The men both sped up, and that caused me to take off running. I'm pretty fast, but they seemed to be gaining on me as I ran, at least one of them was. I didn't know why they were even chasing me or who they even were. I felt like I was running for my life though. It was an extremely scary feeling. Still, one of the men was able to catch up with me. I felt him grabbing me and he tried to tackle me to the ground. I had almost made it to the parking lot at that point, but not quite. He sort of succeeded because I fell, but he also fell and lost grip of me. My feet were towards his head, so while I was on the ground, I kicked at him and got him in the face pretty good. Meanwhile, the other guy, who was much slower, was now reaching us. I got to my feet and took off running again. Both men then started to chase after me. I ran even faster now than before if that was possible. Both men were soon gaining on me though and about 10 feet back. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't think that I would be able to make it to my car and get inside without them catching me, so I ran through the parking lot and then kept running past my car. The men were still gaining on me and getting closer. I kept running all the way out to the road. Then I got lucky. I saw headlights of a car approaching, and this road was usually very quiet at this time of night. I didn't care and I just started sprinting towards the headlights. I was right in the middle of the road, and the car started to stop and honk at me. But also, the men behind me now stopped chasing me because of it. They were a ways back and kind of at the entrance of the parking lot. I started yelling loudly for them to call the police. The person in the car seemed confused, but now that the men were backing away, I took out my own phone and dialed the police. I stayed in the street and told them what was going on. I didn't see the men anymore, but was afraid to go to my car again in case the men were hiding in the bushes or something. So I stayed in the street, and the person who was driving the car rolled down their window just a crack. It was a woman who asked what was going on. I told her that I was being chased by men, and I was on the phone with the cops. The lady then asked if I was okay, and saw that I had scraped my leg. I noticed that it was bleeding from when the men had tackled me on the path. I hadn't even noticed to that point. I was feeling a little more brave after talking to the woman. I told her where my car was and said that I was going to try to go to it. Then I ran for my car and thankfully was able to make it. I didn't see the men at all, but I knew they were probably close by. After getting inside my car, I locked the doors and wasted no time and drove out of there. I came back minutes later though to talk to the police when they arrived at the park. The officers also went in and found my roommate Sarah, who was in the park still. Then they located the two men. It turns out it was all a setup. Sarah was not lost, and she was not even hysterical. She was friends with the two guys, and she lured me out there so the three of them could rob me. She knew that I was making a lot more money than her, and the two guys I guess were friends with her from buying and selling drugs. The men as well as Sarah all had illegal drugs on them, which they ended up getting charged for. The attempted robbery charges ended up being dropped, which made me mad, but I have not seen Sarah since, and she got evicted as well. I just hope that I never see her or her friends again. For some background, I'm a female, and this took place when I was in college. When I was a freshman, I remember that for one of my classes we went on a field trip at night. We were going to be looking at the stars, and we're going at 9 p.m. I guess there was this spot a few miles from campus where you could get a really good view of the sky. It was a park, and the entire field trip was completely for extra credit, because obviously the professor didn't expect everybody to be able to make it that late. There were quite a few students in the class, and I cared a lot about my grades, so I decided to go. We met in this one parking lot on campus at about 8:45 p.m. The turnout was a lot more than I expected. There were probably about 25 of us students there, along with the professor. We boarded the bus, and it took us down to the park that was maybe 10 minutes away. Then we got off, and there was this park surrounded by several wooded areas. There was a large open field in the middle, though, and that's where the professor told us to meet. After he talked to us for a few minutes, we all started looking at the stars. We were free to walk around a little, but we also had worksheets to fill out. I started to walk around and do the assignment. About 10 minutes into it, and I was kind of on the edge near the trees. I remember hearing what sounded like a noise coming from just inside the woods. I looked over, and there was this guy creeping along the edge of the wood line. The man was not in our class. I knew that for a fact, and he was just kind of walking just inside the woods and looking at us. I just looked back and away from him and tried to continue. I thought it was kind of strange, but didn't really know what to make of it. A while later, though, I remember looking back to the woods again. The man was just standing there, just barely inside the woods, and facing me. He appeared to be looking right at me, and it was a little bit weird, so I moved away. I went closer to some other people and continued with the assignment. Things went on, but maybe 15 minutes or so after that, I saw the guy yet again. He was kind of standing just inside the grass, no longer in the woods. Once more, he appeared to be looking at me, which sort of creeped me out a little. However, I really wasn't that scared or anything, because I was with all these other people that were in my class. After a while longer, we were done for the day with the field trip. The professor gathered everybody around and then said that we were leaving. So we all walked back to the front of the park and to the parking lot. Then we boarded the bus. Except, as I was in line to get on the bus, I saw up ahead the man from the park who had been in the woods. He was like the second or third person on the bus, and I was wondering why he was getting on. I had been completely sure that he wasn't in the class. I started to second guess myself, thinking maybe the man was in our class, or maybe he did belong there. Perhaps he was in another class with the professor, or maybe he was with the group in some way. Nobody seemed to say anything to him though, and why was he in the woods and staring at me so weird? I went and sat down on a seat pretty close to the front. I looked back, and it appeared as though the man had got on a seat in the complete back row. We took the ride back, and when we got to campus, we all got off the bus. Then all the students started to disperse. I was a freshman, so I lived in one of the freshman dorms and had walked there. It was about halfway across campus on the other side, so I began to walk back. By now, it was like 10 p.m., and there really weren't any other people out. A couple of other students from class walked near me for a while, but they went to one of the other dorm buildings. Then it was just me on the sidewalk walking back. However, I remember that I heard somebody behind me. I assumed it to be somebody else from the class. However, I felt the need to look over my shoulder, and I did. There, I saw the same man who had been in the woods and stuff. He was walking sort of far behind me by himself. I had never seen him on campus before, and the man did not look college age. He looked older. Obviously, people of all ages go to college, but this guy just didn't seem like a student. He had no backpack or anything, and I hadn't seen him with the worksheet we had for class. I was like 90% sure that he had just come out of the woods and hopped on our bus. How nobody seemed to notice him was beyond me. As I walked, he remained behind me, and I started to get nervous. I began walking faster. The man seemed to speed up as well. I knew that I just needed to get to my dorm building, because if he didn't live there, he wouldn't be able to enter. You needed a key fob to get in. I walked faster, going about as quick as I could without running. I could see my building, and it was just a ways up. During this time, the man stayed about 50 feet behind me or so. Finally, I reached my building. I quickly used my key to get in and made sure that the door shut behind me. Then I went through the lobby and to the stairs to go up quickly. My room was on the 3rd floor, and it had a window looking out. I quickly went to my dorm room and then over to the window. I looked out and saw the man standing by the doors and trying to enter. I watched him start to loudly bang on the front door to the dorm building, which was not opening for him. He eventually stopped, but continued to stand around by the doors for a while. I think he was hoping that somebody else would leave and he could sneak in. Thankfully, nobody did. I looked over again about 10 minutes later, and he was still there, sitting on a bench. Finally, after a while, I looked, and he was gone. I'm pretty sure that that man was up to no good, and I'm really glad that he didn't get in my dorm. I'm a high school teacher, and this is something that happened a few years ago. It's probably the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. So it all started one day when I was teaching. I taught 4 classes throughout the school day at the time. I remember during the second period, right in the middle of class, there was suddenly a loud banging on my classroom door. It interrupted my teaching, and I stopped, annoyed, and walked over to see what it was. When I looked out into the hallway, nobody was there. This seemed like obviously a prank by some kids walking by who were supposed to be in class. Some of the students in my class asked about it and thought that it was funny. I was able to laugh it off as well and then continued with my teaching. The rest of the class period went by without any problems. The next class period, though, it happened again. I'm not sure if it was at around the same point in class, but it was sometime in the middle. There was a very loud knocking on the door once again. I looked over sooner this time and just barely saw through the window somebody moving away. However, I could not tell who it was at all or anything like that, just that somebody had been there. So I went over to the door, opened it, and looked outside. I was not on time to catch whoever had done it running away, so I went back inside my classroom and then told my class about how it had happened before. Then we resumed with class. As you might be able to guess, this happened yet again during the next class period. By now, I really couldn't believe it, and I was also getting frustrated. I thought about leaving my door open for the entire next class period, but ultimately I did not, and in the final class period of the day, there was actually no knocking, which surprised me but was nice. So I figured that it was probably a one-day thing and that it would never happen again. I didn't report it or anything because I didn't think it was a big deal. So the next day I was teaching my classes again. For the first 3 class periods of the day, they went by as normal. There was no knocking on my door or anything strange. Then, during 4th period, I got a call that the school was having a lockdown. I announced it to my students and started following the procedures. First, I locked the classroom door. Then I turned off all the lights in the classroom and instructed the students to leave their desks and go to the back end of the room. I also covered all the windows. Some students were asking why there was a lockdown, but I didn't know. I was not told a reason and was just told that there was a lockdown and to follow the procedure. The students were supposed to keep quiet, and overall everybody did a pretty good job. I heard some occasional whispers from my students, but other than that it was completely quiet. The lockdown continued for at least a good 30 minutes. Things were very quiet. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the same loud banging on my classroom door. I really could not believe it. The school was in a lockdown. Who would possibly be able to pound on the door like that? I got up and walked over to the door and looked through the small window. Nobody was there. Some of the students were talking about it now, and I told them to pipe down. So, about 20 minutes after this, the lockdown was lifted. Class was let out, and things resumed as normal. There was no knocking on my door for the rest of that day. When the school day was over, I talked with some other teachers because I was very curious as to why we had a lockdown. I was told that it was because a student in the school had made direct threats against another student. That did not really solve the mystery of the knocking though, unless that kid was out in the hallway banging on my door. How would anybody be able to walk around in the hallways like that during a lockdown? And why did they always bang on my door? I asked some other teachers and nobody had knocked on their doors. After that day, I never had any more knocking on my door during class. It was really weird and remains sort of a mystery to me. This happened when I was much younger, about 12 years old. Back when I was a kid, I lived with my parents and sister, and my bedroom was on the 2nd floor of our house. One time during the summer, I was staying up late playing video games. This is something that I did often. I loved playing video games, and I had a TV and gaming system in my bedroom. Many summer nights or weekends, I would stay up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning just gaming on anything from Call of Duty to Madden. So one night, I stayed up well past midnight in my room. All the lights in the house were off, and everyone else had gone to bed besides me. I remember that I was actually planning to go to bed soon, but that's when out of nowhere I heard the sound of the back door to our house opening. I had no idea what was going on for a moment. I just barely heard it because my room was a pretty long distance from there. I paused my game and was feeling pretty nervous about it, but then I figured that it was either my dad going outside for some reason or I was just hearing things. I thought that I heard footsteps way down near the back door. So at that point, I quietly got up and walked over to my bedroom door. I then opened the door just a crack to hear better. I couldn't really see anything because every light was off, but now I could hear that it sounded like 2 sets of footsteps walking around downstairs. I looked over to my parents' bedroom and the door was shut. I realized that there was no way anybody would have gone downstairs without at least turning a light on. Meanwhile, the footsteps downstairs were walking around. It was quiet, but I could hear them pretty well now. I didn't know what to do. At the time, I did not have a cell phone. I was 12, and this was like 2005. My parents did have a phone in their bedroom, though. I felt like my only option was to run and wake them up. If whoever these intruders were came upstairs, who knows what could happen? So I decided to make a run for it. After psyching myself up, I left my bedroom and I started sprinting as quietly as I could but as fast as I could for my parents' room. Their bedroom was at the far end of the hallway and mine was closest to the stairs. As I was running, I suddenly and loudly banged my foot into the dresser in the hallway, stubbing my toe badly. There was this dresser up there against the wall, and I had not seen it at all because the lights were off. It hurt so bad, but it was also extremely noisy. I fell down, but when the pain in my toe started to go away after rolling around on the ground for a few seconds, I got back up. Then I limped the rest of the way to my parents' room. After getting inside, I woke them up and told them what was going on. My dad left the bedroom and my mom called the police. However, the two intruders had left. I guess me loudly stubbing my toe had alerted them and they left because of it. I can't think why else they would have left so soon after getting in. The police got there and found that the back door had been pried open. The intruders didn't steal anything because I guess they weren't in the house for long enough. We ended up getting a security system as a result of that. We also got a new back door because the one that we had was pretty old and not very durable. Looking back, I can laugh at it now because of how they left after I accidentally ran into the dresser. At the time, though, it was one of the scariest moments of my life. This happened a really long time ago. I was in high school, and for some class we took a field trip to go hiking. I really don't remember what class that would have been, or why we took a field trip to go hiking. Maybe some gym class? I really don't know. I just know that I remember the actual field trip really well. In fact, it's probably something that I will never forget. So we went to this park that had a bunch of trails. Some parts passed by flat ground, and other parts went through some wooded areas. There were also ponds and some rocky terrain that the trails went through. I'm pretty sure that there were like 10 miles of trails in that park. So when we got there, my class started out together. People ended up splitting up though. I have no idea how the teacher was planning to find everyone and not lose a student in the massive park, but I know that I was kinda hiking on my own. I started out with a few kids in class that I was kind of friends with. However, at one point, for some reason, I stopped. I don't remember why, but they went one way and I went another. So I started hiking by myself, and I do remember that our teacher gave us these step counters. They were the kind that you just shake them and it counts your steps, and you clip them to your pants or something. So we were going to see at the end who got the most steps. That might have been why I went by myself. Anyways, I walked for a while and I passed by this one interesting spot. There was a little pond to my right and lots of trees around, but not really a woods. As I was walking past, I looked up and noticed something. There was a man sitting up in a tree. It was a really weird sight. It shocked me and I almost jumped back when I saw him. The guy was wearing a hat and sunglasses and looking around. I thought maybe he was bird watching or something and just really into it, so he went up in a tree. And he was honestly pretty hard to see at first. I mean, I'd been walking there for at least 15 seconds before I noticed him. But once you saw him, you saw him. I had to walk under the tree on the path to get past him, so after I did so, I continued. However, moments later, I heard movement in the tree, and then heard the man getting down. He literally jumped out from way up in the tree. I glanced behind me and saw the man start to walk after me. That kind of made me nervous. This guy was already seeming a little strange. Why did he suddenly leave the tree after I had passed? I kept walking though, trying to ignore him. However, I soon heard his footsteps, like he was walking behind me. I saw the path turning up ahead, and then there was a spot where you could go left or right. Left was leading back more towards my class, so I took that way. I was really hoping that the man wouldn't do the same, but he did. After that is when I started jogging. This way I would get more steps anyways, so I went faster, and to my horror, it sounded like the guy behind me started jogging as well. I was not expecting that, but it forced me to go even faster. By now, I was running. I went down that path, turned again, and continued running. The good news is at least the man was not gaining on me. Eventually, I stopped hearing him altogether. He must have either not been that fast or in good shape, or just didn't really feel like chasing me that much. Either way, it was a huge relief. I kept going though, and I didn't feel completely safe until I saw other students. Then I was able to hang around them, and I did not want to walk by myself anymore. We walked around for a while longer. Maybe like 30 minutes to an hour later, I randomly saw the guy again. He was now off the trail, almost hiding behind a tree. I don't know how I saw him again, because other people didn't seem to notice. I ignored him though and kept walking. I made sure to stick by other students for the rest of the day. Eventually, we were done with the hiking and we had to meet back up towards the front of the park. Then we left and went back to school. I still think about that sometimes. Why did the guy follow me like that, and why was he even there in a tree? It was very strange. Something really bizarre happened to me about a year ago. So one time I was just having a relaxing night. I lived by myself in a one-bedroom apartment on the second floor. I was on the couch in the living room just playing GTA on my PS5. I'm not really sure of the time, but I know that I'd been playing for a few hours, so it was probably pretty late. My cell phone was on the couch next to me, and I just remember that I heard it vibrate, indicating that I got a new text. I don't really text that many people, so I looked over at my phone, and I just noticed that it was a number and not a name. So that meant it was either somebody who I didn't know or somebody who I had never texted before. I looked at the text and it said, "You're playing GTA." When I saw it, I had to do a double take. How would somebody know that I was playing GTA? It could have been because of the PlayStation Network, maybe one of my friends on there, but I was also playing offline and I'm not much of an online gamer. Sure, I have friends on the PlayStation Network, but I'm not really friends with any people who I know in real life on there. Then I thought that maybe somebody was watching me. My apartment was on the second floor like I said, and it looked out to the parking lot. My blinds were also almost completely open. Even though most of my lights were off, it would be pretty easy to see my large TV from outside. I glanced out the window but didn't see anyone obviously watching me or anything. There were a bunch of cars there, so it could have probably been anyone. I texted the number back saying, "Who is this?" but there was no answer. Still, I was curious. I was sure that it had to be somebody out in the parking lot, so I went over to the window and kept looking. After examining the cars around, I didn't see much. It was quiet with it being late at night. There were no cars coming and going or with their lights on. Also, I didn't see anybody out walking around or anything. I kept watching though. I was at the window looking around for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Then I saw a car door open. A car was parked in a space that was sort of facing my apartment. It had been too dark to really see if anybody was inside of the cars though. After the door to this one car opened, a man stepped out. He was wearing all black and also had a ski mask on covering his entire head. Obviously, this looked very suspicious. Then, after getting out of the car, the man started jogging towards the main entrance doors of my apartment building. When he got to the doors, he was out of my sight. I wondered if he was going to try to break into my apartment or something. I made sure that my door was locked and stuff. Then I looked back to my phone. I still hadn't received a new text. I also decided to close my blinds, which I should have done a long time before that. About 30 minutes went by though, and nobody tried entering my apartment, knocking on the door or anything, and I didn't get any more texts from the number either. After a long time, I looked back to the parking lot. The car was still there, which was just a dark-colored 4-door sedan that I did not recognize. I kept gaming and watching my phone, but got no more texts. When I finally was going to go to bed a while later, I looked again. This time, the car was gone. I have no proof, but I can only guess that the texts I got and the masked man were linked. Either way, it's really suspicious to see a guy wearing all black and a ski mask enter your apartment building. I'm just glad that nothing bad happened. This happened when I was a 17-year-old girl and in high school. I played volleyball when I was in high school, and it was a big part of my high school career. I remember that sometimes we used to have practice really early in the morning before school. It was because the gym had to be shared with the other sports teams and stuff. So we would have practice at like 6 a.m. and it would go until about 8. One day I got up early at 4:45 a.m. to get ready for the day. I lived with my parents at the time in a pretty average neighborhood. Obviously, it was still pitch dark outside, and I left home at about 5:30 because it was only a 10-minute drive to the school. I had a car back then that I drove to and from school every day. When I left, I backed out of the driveway, and when I did, I remember seeing a car that was parked on the side of our street. It was sort of in front of our house, which was strange because normally no cars parked on the side of our street at all. And when I started to drive away, the car's headlights turned on and then started driving down the street after me. I didn't really think much of it until I turned off our street and the car went the same way. When I turned again, it did the same. I was starting to wonder if I was being followed for some reason. I did not recognize the car and wasn't sure who it would be. I kept driving to school though, and the roads were very quiet with it being so early. Me and the other car were about the only two on the roads. Soon I approached my school with the car still behind me. I turned into the student parking lot and there were hardly any other cars there. The only other ones were my teammates. I drove around and parked pretty close to the school. The car that was following me entered the parking lot as well, but did not park near me. It went to the complete opposite far corner than me, a long ways away. This made me feel better because it was so far. Plus, now that I was at school, I felt safer because when I got inside I would be around a lot more people. I was curious as to who was driving the other car though, so I sat in my car and waited for a minute or two. However, nobody got out. The car was backed into a parking space, so kind of facing me, except it was just really far away. I got out of my car finally and then walked inside the school. Then I got ready for volleyball practice. By the time practice started, I had forgot all about the car following me. When practice was over, it was time for the school day. Now, the next strange thing that I remember was after my first hour class. At this time, keep in mind that I had forgot all about the car following me. Now, I specifically remember that I was by my locker and standing near it talking to some of my friends. When I was looking around the crowded hallway, I saw this guy a long ways away just staring at me. It was strange because I didn't recognize him, and he also looked a little bit older. I just assumed him to be a senior who looked old, but I didn't know why he would be staring at me. I looked away, and then looked again a short time later, and he was still staring at me. I was kind of creeped out, so I looked away again and then left for my next class. During this second hour class that I was in, I remembered that the school went into a lockdown. I had no idea what it was about. The lockdown ended up lasting for almost an hour. At first, even after it ended, no information was given. By the end of the school day though, I found out that it was for a suspicious man in the hallway. Somebody who was not a student, had no hall pass and no credentials or identification. When questioned, he ran away, causing the lockdown. The police got called, and after the guy ran from them, he was arrested for trespassing. Everybody was talking about it. I didn't get confirmation, but I realized that it had to be the same guy, and I think that it was also the guy who had followed me to school from my house. It really creeps me out, and makes me wonder if he was stalking me. Last year, I was working late one night. I worked at a department store that was connected to a mall. We were open pretty late, and we were the last store open in the immediate area. Surrounding us was a good number of other stores and businesses as well. So, after leaving work, I walked out to my car in the large parking lot. I was all by myself, and my car was the only one parked in that entire section of the lot. It was kind of far from the building, and as I was making my way towards it, I saw a woman kind of walking towards me. She was also a good distance away, coming from the opposite direction. She appeared to have come from another nearby parking lot that was connected, but separated by some trees and bushes. I wasn't quite sure where she was going or who she was, but I kept walking to my car. Eventually, as we both got closer, I heard the woman say hi, and then she started to wave at me. She asked me to wait, so I did not get in my car, and I asked her what was up. She approached me and then said that she was having car problems nearby and really needed some help. Now, I know a little bit about cars, but not that much. I can jump start a car and I can change a tire, and sometimes I can have an idea of what's wrong with a car, but other than that, I don't know a whole lot. The woman overall came across as friendly though, and seemed like she genuinely needed help. I asked her first if she knew what was wrong with her car, and she said no, and it wouldn't start. Then I asked her where her car was. She told me that it was in the Chick-fil-A parking lot not too far away. I couldn't see the lot, but I knew where the Chick-fil-A was. It was pretty close by and separated by some trees and sort of on the edge of the property. The woman also claimed that her phone was dead. I asked her if she wanted to use my phone to call her road service. She asked me if I could take a look at her car and get an idea of what was wrong with it, because she knew absolutely nothing about cars. Then she wanted to call her road service after that. I agreed and followed the woman to the end of the parking lot and up a short grass hill and beyond some trees. We made it to the Chick-fil-A parking lot, which was almost completely empty. There was just one car that sat in a space, and it was a silver 4-door sedan that looked to be about 10 years old. We got to the car and started to look at it. The hood was open, but I was more interested in trying to start the car to see what kind of noise it made, if any. The woman walked over to the hood, and as I asked her to try to start the car, I noticed something. Beyond the car, about 50 feet away at the end of the parking lot, there was a man hiding in the bushes. The guy was blending in pretty good, and I feel lucky that I even saw him, but he was kind of watching us. I kind of zoned out for a second when I noticed him. The woman then told me to get inside of the passenger seat and she would try to start it. I interrupted her and quietly said, "Who's the guy in the bushes?" She stopped talking, and without even looking, she said, "What? There's no guy in the bushes." I told her to look, and I glanced in the direction of the guy. She looked right over there for a good 5 seconds, and then said that there was nobody there. She seemed very confident about it, and that seemed suspicious. Then she told me again to get in the car and she would try starting it. I just started walking away. I felt like I had been set up. As I left, the woman yelled at me to come back. I did not, though. I continued to the end of the parking lot. As I was doing so, I looked to the bushes and saw the man emerging. He then started to run straight for me at about full speed. I took off running and was maybe 50 feet ahead of him. I left the parking lot, went back down the small grass hill, and got into the large mall parking lot. I sprinted all the way back to my vehicle, got inside, and left. I was able to make it with some time to spare before the man could reach my car. He never got to me, and I drove away and left and reported it to the police. I'm pretty sure that the man and woman easily left though before the cops got there. Looking back, I'm really thankful that I saw the guy when I did. Had I not, who knows what could have happened. This happened back when I was in college a few years ago. During this time, I used to love to play video games online with my friend group. There were a few other guys at college who I became friends with. We had a group chat and stuff, and we would play games on our PCs all the time. This story took place during my 4th year at the school. I was living in an old college house with 3 other guys, one of which would game with us a lot. The other guys lived across campus, one in another house a few blocks away, and the others in apartments farther out. So anyways, our favorite game to play was probably Minecraft. There's really so much stuff that you can do on that game, and we would build things in survival mode and stuff like that. We would all talk to each other when we played, and we would get on the same server. So one time I was on, and I think 4 other guys were as well. At least an hour or 2 into Minecraft, and our friend James suddenly said that somebody was in his house. We were all kind of talking at once, and he said it quietly so nobody really heard him the first time. Then, when we quieted down, James said that he thought somebody was inside of his house. We asked him more, and he was talking really quiet, but he said that he was hearing noises outside, and that he thought he heard footsteps. We joked about it at first, figuring either James was joking or he was just being paranoid. It just seemed like a pretty crazy thing. Most of us just kept going with the game. But then, James suddenly went offline. We were like, where did James go? Do you guys think he was serious? All of us friends would joke around with each other a lot, but we never really pulled elaborate pranks or stuff like that. I don't really think that we thought he was joking, but maybe we thought he was just being over-worried. Still, we decided to try to call him back. When we did, he didn't answer, so I got a little bit concerned. I lived the closest to James, and the other guys and I were debating if I should go over to his house. After all of us texted James and he didn't reply, and he also didn't respond to our phone calls, we talked for a few minutes about it. We were all still on Minecraft, but not really playing anymore. Then, probably 5 minutes after James went offline, I heard a knock on my front door. The other guys heard it too and asked what it was. I left my room and I went to look out the window. James was standing there at my front door, knocking on it. I went over and let him in, and he was out of breath from running. I asked him what was going on, and I said that we had all been trying to call him. James said that he thought somebody was in his house and he had to get out of there. So he took off running and he went to my house because it was closest to him. He said that he didn't hear the calls because he was busy sprinting to my place. I asked him if he saw someone in his house, and he said no. James lived with a roommate in a house pretty similar to mine. It was small with 2 floors and was a pretty old place, but his roommate was at work and often worked late nights. James said that he was not 100% sure that somebody was there, but like 80% sure. He said he heard noises but didn't see anyone, so he couldn't definitively confirm. We decided to go back to his place, but before leaving we grabbed a baseball bat and a golf club to arm ourselves. We didn't want to call the cops yet because we didn't know for sure if somebody was at his house. So James and I then walked back to his place. After we arrived, before going in, we listened and looked around. All the lights appeared to be off, which is how James had left it. We were not hearing any obvious noises of somebody being inside either, so we proceeded to the door. We slowly opened it and then called out, asking if anybody was there. No one answered. Then we stepped inside and turned on the light. We would look around every room one at a time with our weapons in hand. One by one we cleared each room. Then we went upstairs. That's where James had been gaming and his bedroom was. I was really nervous then, I'm not gonna lie, despite being armed. When we got upstairs, we first went into James's bedroom. We looked all around and turned on the lights. Nobody was in there. And the entire time to that point, we hadn't really heard anything either. So I was starting to feel better, like maybe James was just imagining things. Then, as we were both up in his bedroom, we suddenly heard some footsteps downstairs, and then the front door open and close. Both of us could not believe it. We went over to the window in James's bedroom and looked out. We sort of saw what looked like a man walking away down the sidewalk, but we only saw him for like a second. I couldn't tell what the guy looked like at all. It was too dark and I barely saw him. We both realized, though, that James did in fact hear somebody in his house. We went and locked the door and then called the rest of the friend group and told them about it. The man must have been hiding in either a coat closet or the basement when we searched the main floor, because we hadn't seen him anywhere. Looking back, I'm really glad that we didn't see him. If we did, I don't think either of us were really prepared to whack him with our bat or golf club. We probably would have just ran away. I think the guy just walked in the door, because a lot of us college kids were bad at locking doors. Not after that incident, though. I don't know who that man was, or what he was after, but I'm glad that he left when he did.